Chapter 1. The Daughter Who Stayed. I thought staying silent would keep my family together, but the night my father died, they handed me papers I was too exhausted to read, erased my name from his life's work, and told me I was just being emotional. I'm Serena, and this is the story of how my own family used grief, law, and a single signature to push me out, and how staying quiet long enough changed everything. I was the one who stayed when everyone else found a reason to leave. I did not say it for sympathy. I said it because it became the role my family handed me, the steady pair of hands, the quiet driver, the person who answered the late-night calls and showed up before anyone else had even put shoes on. I told myself that staying meant I mattered. For a long time, that belief was the only thing that kept me moving. My mother, Lillian Caldwell, died in 2016 after a short, brutal illness that moved faster than our prayers. 1 month she was folding towels and humming off-key, the next she was too tired to lift her head. I still remember the way she squeezed my fingers in the hospice room, like she was trying to press something permanent into my skin. After she was gone, the house sounded wrong. The refrigerator seemed louder, the hallway creaked more, even the sunlight felt like it belonged to someone else. My father, Gordon, tried to be strong in the way men his age were taught, with clenched jaws and busy hands. He started fixing things that were not broken. He stayed outside longer. He acted like grief was a chore you could finish if you worked hard enough. 2 years later, in 2018, he married Patricia. She arrived with soft cardigans, neat hair, and a smile that never lingered too long. She was careful around my mother's name, careful around my father's sorrow, careful around me. I wanted to hate her. I tried, but my father looked less hollow when she was in the room, and I was tired of watching him eat dinner alone at the kitchen counter. I told myself that love could expand, that a family could stretch without tearing. Patricia had a son from her first marriage, Miles. He was younger than me by 7 years, confident in the casual way some men are when they have never had to earn their place. He moved through the house like it was always his, leaning against door frames, speaking with his mouth half full, laughing at his own jokes. My father laughed too, and I watched that laughter like a foreign language I used to know. By 2020, my own marriage was already dissolving. My husband had grown tired of my absence, even though I was always physically present. I was there in the kitchen, there in the living room, there in bed, but my mind was usually somewhere else, weighing someone else's needs, smoothing someone else's mess. When the divorce finalized, there were no dramatic screams, just paperwork, quiet disappointment, and a last box carried out to my car while the neighbors pretended not to look. I moved back to Maplewood, New Jersey, into a small rental 10 minutes from my father's house. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I needed space and he needed company. I told myself I was doing the right thing. Then the years started tightening. In 2021, my father's cardiologist began using words like progressive and management and risk. My father started forgetting small things, not the big memories, not the stories he told at barbecues, but the simple daily pieces that made up a life. He would ask me twice if I had eaten. He would misplace his keys inside the refrigerator. Once, after a long appointment, he looked at me in the parking lot with a tired confusion and called me Lillian. I swallowed the grief like I always did. I smiled and said, "It's me, Dad, it's Serena." He blinked, embarrassed, and patted my arm as if I was the one who needed comfort. From 2021 to 2023, I became the rhythm of his care. I drove him to appointments, tracked prescriptions, set alarms, cooked meals he could manage, and stayed overnight when his chest pain flared, and Patricia insisted she was too anxious to sleep in the same room. She said it with a trembling voice and moist eyes, as if anxiety was a delicate crown that excused everything. I would nod because arguing felt like cruelty. Patricia liked to tell people how devoted I was. She said it at church, at the pharmacy, in the waiting room, her hand pressed to her chest. She made it sound like a compliment and a burden at the same time. "Serena is such a help," she would say. "I don't know what we would do without her." Then, when the person walked away, her face would smooth into something blank and practical. Miles would show up in bursts, usually on weekends, usually dressed like he had somewhere better to be. He brought expensive coffee for my father and a kind of restless energy that filled the room. My father would brighten and Patricia would soften, and I would become invisible in the background, rinsing dishes, sorting pills, wiping counters, so no one could accuse me of being difficult. One afternoon, I arrived with groceries and found my father's old office door locked. It used to be his favorite room, the place where he kept property files for Caldwell Property Group LLC, the small rental business he built over decades. I stood there with the bags cutting into my fingers and tried the handle again, like the lock might suddenly recognize me. Patricia appeared behind me, her voice light. "Oh, we had to secure that room. Papers were getting scattered. Your father needs less stress." I asked for the key. She smiled and said, "I'll handle it, sweetheart. You have enough on your plate." That night, I lay awake thinking about the word secure. It was a word people used when they wanted to sound responsible. It was also a word people used when they wanted to keep something away from you. A week later, I noticed my mother's photos were gone from the hallway shelf, not packed away with ceremony, not moved to a safer spot, just removed like dust. The space where her face used to be looked too clean, too intentional. I found the frames in a cardboard box in the basement, stacked behind holiday decorations. When I asked Patricia about it, her eyes widened with practiced innocence. "Oh, Serena, I thought those would make your dad sad. I was trying to protect him." Protect him from his own wife's memory, I thought, but I did not say it. My father was in the living room, half asleep in his chair, his medication making his eyelids heavy. I looked at him and felt the old instinct to keep peace, to make things easier, to swallow my anger so he could breathe. Miles did not swallow anything. He was blunt in a way that felt like cruelty dressed as honesty. One night, after I reminded him that our father had a follow-up appointment, he leaned back at the kitchen counter and looked at me like I was being dramatic. "You do all this because you have time," he said, "not because the family needs it. You're not the only one with a life." My throat tightened. I wanted to say that I had built my life around their needs, that I had moved back, given up weekends, given up sleep, given up the illusion that anyone would ever take care of me the way I took care of them. Instead, I heard myself say, "Fine, I'll handle it." Patricia watched the exchange quietly, stirring tea she did not drink. Her silence felt like agreement. The moment that changed the temperature in my chest happened on a hospital night that smelled like sanitizer and stale coffee. My father had been admitted for observation after a scary episode, his heart racing, his hands trembling. He was asleep when I stepped out into the corridor to find water. At the end of the hallway, I saw Patricia with a man I did not recognize. He wore a suit that looked too expensive for midnight, and beside him stood a woman holding a small case, the kind notaries carry. Her badge caught the fluorescent light. I slowed without meaning to. Patricia's voice drifted toward me, low and urgent. "This is just paperwork for insurance and the doctors. We need it signed while he's still clear enough." The suited man nodded. He spoke quickly, but I caught fragments. Durable, authority, decisions, words that belonged to power, not care. My stomach turned cold. I stepped closer and said my father's name. Patricia's head snapped toward me. Her expression shifted in a blink, from sharp to sweet. "Serena, honey," she said, "you scared me. You should be resting. You've been doing too much." I asked what the paperwork was. Patricia smiled wider, like the question itself was silly. "It's nothing for you to worry about. You're exhausted. You're hearing things that aren't there." The suited man cleared his throat and offered a polite nod, then looked away, already dismissing me. The notary kept her face neutral, eyes down, like she had learned not to notice family tension. I stood there feeling suddenly childish, like I had walked into a room where adults were making decisions I was not allowed to understand. I wanted to demand answers. I wanted to take the folder from Patricia's hands and read every page. Instead, I looked through the small window into my father's room and saw him sleeping, mouth slightly open, one hand curled around the blanket like a boy. He looked fragile in a way I was not ready for. Patricia touched my arm. "Go sit down," she whispered. "I've got this." I nodded because I did not know how to do anything else. Later, in the dim waiting area, I stared at the vending machine lights and told myself I was imagining danger. I told myself Patricia was only trying to help. I told myself that families were messy and grief made people strange. I told myself that staying quiet was the same thing as being loyal. When the nurse finally said my father was stable, I walked back into his room and sat beside him, listening to the monitor's steady rhythm. I watched his chest rise and fall, counting the seconds between breaths, afraid of the silence that might come if I stopped paying attention. I held his hand and felt how thin it had become, the skin loose where it used to be strong. In that moment, I understood something I did not yet have words for. I was no longer seen as his daughter. I was the person who filled the gaps, who absorbed the fear, who made everything easier so others would not have to feel uncomfortable. I stayed anyway. Not because I was blind, not because I was weak, but because leaving, at that moment, felt like abandoning the last part of myself that still believed family meant something. Chapter 2. The signature I didn't understand. The first thing that changed after my father died was not the silence, but the speed at which decisions were made without me. It was early January in Raleigh, North Carolina, the kind of winter morning where the sky stays gray even after the sun rises. My father, Thomas Avery, had been on heavy pain medication for months. The doctors called it management. I called it watching a man slowly fade while his body stayed alive. In the last weeks, he drifted between moments of clarity and long stretches where his eyes looked through me instead of at me. When the hospital called just before dawn, I drove there on autopilot. I did not cry in the car, I did not pray, I just kept my hands steady on the wheel and told myself to stay functional. My stepmother, Carol, was already in the room when I arrived. She sat straight in the chair beside his bed, coat still on, purse in her lap, as if she had been waiting for a signal rather than a goodbye. Her son, Evan, stood near the window scrolling on his phone, his face blank, detached. Carol stood and took my hands. She told me she was sorry. She said my father had fought hard. Her voice shook in all the right places. I nodded and leaned over the bed. My father's skin was warm but unfamiliar, like I was touching a stranger who happened to wear my father's face. I waited for grief to break through me. Instead, there was only exhaustion. I had already said goodbye so many times in the months before that the final moment felt administrative. Evan asked what would happen next, not to me, not to the nurse, but to his mother. Carol told him they would handle everything, one step at a time. The way she said it made it clear that I was not included in that we. The nurse explained forms and procedures. I listened, answered questions, signed where I was told. Carol stood beside me, letting the staff treat her as the grieving widow, while I became the capable daughter. It was a familiar pattern. I did the work, she received the sympathy. The funeral was 4 days later. Carol chose the chapel, the flowers, the music, and the photographs. She selected a picture of my father taken years earlier, before his illness, before his confusion. In the photo, he stood between Carol and Evan, smiling wide, his arm around each of them. There was no picture of him and me. I arrived early and found Carol speaking with a man in a navy suit. He held a leather folder against his chest and wore the calm expression of someone used to difficult rooms. Carol introduced him as my father's attorney. He shook my hand briefly, politely, then turned his body back toward her. I assumed we would speak privately, that there would be some acknowledgement of my role in my father's life and business. I had helped him manage Avery Coast Rentals LLC for years. I knew the tenants, the maintenance issues, the bank accounts. I thought that history mattered. Carol placed a hand on my arm and guided me away, her grip gentle but firm. She told me today was about honoring my father, not talking business. The attorney nodded and said they could talk later. Later turned out to be a word that did not include me. During the service, Carol and Evan sat in the front row. I sat behind them. When the pastor asked if anyone wanted to share a memory, I stood and told a story about my father teaching me how to drive, how he made me practice parallel parking until I stopped shaking. I saw Carol's jaw tighten. Evan turned around and looked at me like I was overstepping. After the service, Evan cornered me near the coffee table. He told me I made it sound like I was the center of my father's life. He said Carol was the one who had been there. He said I only showed up when it was convenient. I did not argue. I had learned that facts meant nothing to people who had already chosen their version of the story. 6 weeks before my father died, there had been a night I could not stop replaying. It was 2 a.m. at the hospital. My father had been admitted after a severe episode. His heart rate spiked and dropped without warning. The monitors beeped softly in the dark. Carol said she could not handle hospitals at night. She said the machines made her anxious. I stayed. I stepped into the hallway to get water and saw Carol standing with a man in a suit and a woman holding a small case. The woman wore a badge on a lanyard. Even in my exhaustion, I recognized what she was, a mobile notary. Carol noticed me and smiled too quickly. She said my timing was perfect. The man explained they needed a few signatures. He said it was a durable power of attorney meant to help with medical decisions and insurance matters. He said it was routine. I looked through the window into my father's room. He was awake, but barely. His eyes were unfocused, his breathing uneven. I asked Carol what exactly they were signing. She squeezed my arm and told me I was exhausted. She said I was hearing things that were not there. She said they were only trying to help. The man added that it simply authorized someone to act on my father's behalf if necessary. He said it was in my father's best interest. I should have asked why it was happening in the middle of the night. I should have asked why there was urgency. I should have asked why I was not given time to read. Instead, I went back into the room and sat beside my father. Carol placed papers on the rolling table. The attorney flipped pages quickly. The notary stood near the door. I asked my father if he understood. He looked at me with confusion and said Carol told him it would help everyone stop worrying. Carol leaned in and told him to sign, that I would take care of everything like I always did. His hand shook as he signed. The signature barely looked like his. Then the papers were turned toward me. The attorney told me I needed to sign as well, just to acknowledge I was present. My head throbbed. I was too tired to process legal language. I signed where he pointed, believing my name was being used to protect my father. After my father died, that night came back sharper. The week after the funeral, my access to the business accounts disappeared. Emails stopped. When I called the bank, they told me my permissions had been removed. I went to my father's house and found Carol at the kitchen table with folders spread out. I asked why my access was gone. She told me I was grieving and grief made people suspicious. She said I did not want me spiraling. Evan walked in and asked why I was there. He told me to stay out of financial matters. He said Carol had it covered. When I reminded him that I had been handling it for years, he told me I was just his daughter. 2 days later, an official envelope arrived from the county court. I opened it standing at my kitchen counter. The notice stated that Carol was seeking appointment as personal representative of the estate. It stated that a durable power of attorney existed and that my signature appeared as acknowledgement. It stated that I had waived certain rights to be notified of transactions. I stared at the attached copy. My father's shaky signature, the attorney's initials, the notary stamp, and my own handwriting, exactly where I had been told to place it. I did not remember agreeing to step aside. I remembered a hallway, a tired father, a woman telling me I was exhausted. That night I sat alone in my father's living room, the letter in my lap, the house quiet in a way that felt deliberate. I realized I had been removed from my family in ink, and I had helped hold the pen. Chapter 3. What Silence Lets You See. It was clarity. The kind that does not arrive with relief, only with direction. I did not feel brave, I felt awake. And once you are awake, pretending becomes harder than action. I stopped calling. I stopped explaining. When Carol texted asking if I was eating, I replied with a polite yes. When Evan asked if I was feeling better, I said I was resting. I let them believe the version of me that made them comfortable. The grieving daughter. The emotional one. The woman who would eventually get tired and drift away. Then I sat at my kitchen table and rebuilt the last 2 years of my father's life, one fact at a time. I started with dates. I pulled every calendar reminder from my phone from 2020 through 2022. Cardiology visits, medication refills, emergency room admissions, follow-up appointments that never happened because my father was too weak to leave the house. I printed them and lined them up across the table. I added pharmacy receipts, photos of pill bottles I had taken late at night to keep track of dosages, notes I had written to myself like, "Ask doctor about confusion," and "Dad called me mom again." This was not memory, this was record. I had been listed as my father's healthcare proxy since late 2020. We signed the paperwork after his first serious hospitalization. It was the reason nurses called me when something changed. It was the reason I could speak to doctors without being questioned. That document mattered now. I called WakeMed Medical Records and gave them my name. I was listed as healthcare proxy, I said. I need my father's records. All of them. The woman on the phone paused, then said, "That is fine. I will email the release form. You will need to provide ID." I completed the form and sent it back within minutes. Then I called my father's primary physician. When Dr. Marcus Heller walked into the exam room 2 days later, he did not need me to explain why I was there. He sat down slowly and folded his hands. "I'm sorry," he said. "Your father declined quickly." "I need honesty," I said. There were legal documents signed near the end. Was he consistently able to understand complex decisions? Dr. Heller looked at the wall for a moment, then back at me. He had moments of clarity, he said, but there were documented periods of confusion. Medication, cardiac output, oxygen levels, it all affects cognition. "Enough to question a legal signature?" I asked. He nodded. "Yes," he said, "especially late at night, especially without full explanation. I can document that." My chest tightened. I thanked him and left before the feeling in my throat turned into tears. When the medical records arrived, I read them carefully. Progress notes, medication changes, observations of confusion, disorientation, my father asking the same question repeatedly within minutes. The night of the signing was there, noted as agitation and confusion, pain medication increased. I did not feel vindicated, I felt sick. The next step was legal, and this time I chose someone who did not know my family. Julia Kane's office was small and unpretentious, tucked between a tax service and a dry cleaner. When she called my name, her voice was calm and direct. She shook my hand and gestured for me to sit. "Tell me everything," she said. "Start with the night the document was signed." I told her. The hallway, the notary, Grant Callahan speaking quickly, Carol telling me I was exhausted, my father's shaking hand, my own signature added without explanation. Julia listened without interrupting. When she finished, she nodded once. "They pushed you out early," she said, "and they assumed you would not come back with questions." "Is the power of attorney valid?" I asked. "In form, yes, notary, signatures, correct language, but validity also depends on capacity and influence. Based on what you are describing, there is a strong argument for undue influence and lack of capacity." She flipped through the court notice I had brought. "They are trying to keep you away from transactions," she said, "because you would notice patterns." "Patterns like what?" I asked. Julia looked at me carefully. "Like documents that were drafted but never filed," she said. My heart skipped. "What do you mean?" I asked. She turned her computer screen slightly toward me. "This is the probate docket," she said. "It lists everything submitted to the court: will, petition, inventory request. There is no amendment." I stared at the screen. "My father was meticulous," I said. "He would not stop at one version." Julia nodded. "People who anticipate conflict often add a codicil," she said, "a quiet adjustment, something that does not change love but changes control." The word sat between us. "How would we find it?" I asked. Julia leaned back. "Emails, drafts, personal devices, anything your father used himself." My father's tablet came to mind immediately. He kept it beside his chair. He used it to read the news, check emails, manage reminders. Carol never asked for it. She probably assumed it was useless. That night I charged the tablet at my kitchen counter and waited for it to turn on. His email account opened without a password. I sat there for a long moment before typing anything, my fingers hovering like they were about to trespass. Then I searched Carol's name. Then Grant Callahan's. A thread appeared from 6 weeks before my father died. The subject line read, "Draft Codicil for Review." My breath caught as I opened it. Carol wrote that she wanted the document prepared but not filed yet. Grant responded with cautious language about disclosure obligations. Carol replied that she would manage the family side and did not want complications. In a later message, Grant mentioned my name. He wrote that I was detail-oriented, that I might request records, that they should be prepared. The attachment was a PDF. I opened it with shaking hands. The codicil named me as oversight trustee for Avery Coast Rentals, LLC, in the event of any sale or major transaction. It did not give me money, it gave me authority. It was my father's safeguard. It was also the reason I had to be removed. I forwarded everything to Julia, every email, every attachment. Then I printed copies and placed them in a folder. When my phone buzzed with a message from Carol asking if I wanted to come by for dinner, I read it without reacting. "I'm still processing," I typed. "Maybe another time." I set the phone down and looked around my quiet apartment. The silence no longer felt like abandonment. It felt like preparation. I decided I would stay silent a little longer, but this time my silence would be documented. Chapter 4. They thought I was still quiet. I let that quiet carry me forward, and I learned how much people reveal when they think you are no longer paying attention. Carol's voice softened after that. She called the way people do when they believe control is slipping, disguised as concern. She asked if I was eating. if I was sleeping, if work was too much. I answered politely. Short sentences. No questions. No emotion she could use. Each call ended with her telling me to take care of myself, and I realized she meant something else entirely. Evans stopped pretending. His messages were blunt, careless. You done being upset yet? Mom says you're being distant. Just stay out of this and everything will be fine. I replied with neutral words and let the silence stretch. They thought I was fading. They mistook restraint for retreat. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday afternoon when my phone rang with a number I did not recognize. It was Mrs. Alvarez, who lived 2 doors down from one of my father's rental properties. I hope I'm not overstepping, she said, already apologetic, but I saw a real estate sign go up this morning. I thought you should know. My pulse slowed instead of racing. I thanked her and hung up, then drove to Ridgeview Lane. The sign stood bright and confident in the front yard, planted like a flag. The duplex my father had refused to sell for years, because the tenants were steady, because he believed in keeping promises. I took photos from my car, then from the sidewalk. The address, the agent name, the date and time stamped cleanly on my phone. I did not knock on doors. I did not ask questions. I called Julia. That should not be happening, she said after I explained. Probate is still open, and if the property is held through the LLC, authority matters. Who signed the listing agreement? I'll find out, I said. It took 2 days. A realtor accidentally copied me on an email about a showing before removing my address. It was enough. Evan had signed as managing member of Avery Coast Rentals, LLC. Evan was not the managing member. My father never amended the operating agreement. Julia exhaled slowly when I forwarded her the email. That is unauthorized, she said, and reckless. The second crack was smaller, quieter, and more personal. I stopped by Carol's house to drop off mail that still came to my address. She let me in without enthusiasm and went back to rearranging paperwork on the dining table. The living room looked staged, clean, stripped of warmth. The photo of my father and me at the beach was gone, the one where he squinted into the sun and laughed because the wind kept stealing his hat. In its place sat a decorative bowl, empty and cold. I touched the shelf before I realized what I was doing. Where did the photos go? I asked. Carol did not look up. I needed to simplify, she said. Too many reminders aren't healthy. Unhealthy for who? I asked. She turned then, eyes glossy, voice gentle. You're reading into things again, she said. I worry about you. Evan appeared in the hallway, arms crossed. Here we go, he said. This is exactly why boundaries were necessary. I nodded once and left. In my car, my hands shook, not with anger, but with clarity. They felt safe enough to erase me. People only do that when they believe there will be no consequences. The third crack came through paperwork. Julia sent me a message with attached filings. They're moving money. The documents showed transfers from the LLC account into a new business account under Evan's name. Not massive sums, but consistent, planned. Evan had also applied for a business loan using LLC assets as collateral. He's leveraging your father's properties, Julia said when I called, without authority. Does he know? I asked. He knows enough to think no one will stop him. I built my records carefully. Dates, filings, listings, emails, screenshots. I labeled folders by week. I backed everything up twice. Silence became discipline. Then the certified envelope arrived. It was thick, formal, addressed to me in precise type. Inside was a petition filed with the county court. Carol and Evan were asking for a declaratory judgment to affirm Carol's authority as personal representative and to bar me from interfering in estate matters. They framed it as protection, as an attempt to prevent disruption. Julia read it and was quiet for a long moment. They sued you, she said. They want the court to legitimize what they've already done. I could have ignored them, I said. They tried, she replied. You didn't disappear. I laughed once, sharp and surprised. They think I'm still quiet. Julia's voice remained calm. Now we respond, but you still do not speak to them directly. Let the filings speak. We prepared our response carefully. We attached medical records documenting cognitive impairment, the timeline of hospitalizations, the unauthorized listing agreement, the loan application, the operating agreement naming my father as managing member, and finally, the codicil. The codicil they never filed. When Carol called that evening, her composure had cracked. Why didn't you just talk to us, she asked. Why make this legal? I didn't know talking was allowed, I said. This could have stayed in the family. It was messy before I knew. Now it's documented. Evan took the phone from her. You're doing this for money, he said. Admit it. I'm doing this for accuracy, I said. Those aren't the same. You won't win, he said. You never do. I hung up without answering. The hearing was scheduled for late spring. I did not celebrate. I did not panic. I organized my files again and placed them in a single folder labeled Evidence. The night before the court date, I sat alone at my kitchen table, the apartment quiet in a way that felt intentional rather than empty. I did not rehearse speeches. I did not imagine confrontations. I thought about my father teaching me to check facts twice before making decisions, about my mother telling me that dignity was not loud, about how staying silent had taught me more than arguing ever did. For the first time since everything began to unravel, I did not feel like I was waiting for something to happen. I felt ready.
Chapter 5. Karma never needed my voice. Something shifted after that, not because I won anything, but because I stopped holding myself together for people who never tried to hold me. The probate hearing took place in September 2024 at the Lake County Courthouse in Waukegan, Illinois. I arrived early, dressed plainly, carrying a folder that felt heavier than it should have. My attorney, Rebecca Moore, met me outside the courtroom. She looked composed, professional, the kind of woman who believed in preparation more than performance. "You ready?" she asked quietly. "I am," I said, and for the first time I meant it. Inside, the room was smaller than I had imagined. No drama, no grand stage, just wooden benches, muted colors, and the low hum of other people waiting for their own versions of truth. My stepmother, Lorraine Hayes, sat at the opposite table beside her attorney. She wore a soft gray blazer and clutched a tissue like a prop she had practiced with. Her son, Brandon Hayes, sat stiffly beside her, jaw set, eyes sharp, already defensive. The judge entered without ceremony. Everyone stood, then sat. The clerk read the case number. The words sounded distant, like they belonged to someone else's life. Lorraine's attorney began by painting a familiar picture. "My client devoted herself to her husband during his illness," he said. "She has only sought to protect the estate from interference fueled by grief and misunderstanding." Lorraine nodded slowly, eyes damp. Rebecca stood next. "We are not here to question devotion," she said. "We are here to question decisions made in secrecy, authority assumed without approval, and documents intentionally withheld from the court." The judge leaned forward. "Let us proceed with the evidence," she said. Rebecca opened the folder and handed up the first exhibit. A codicil executed 6 weeks prior to Mr. Hayes's death, not filed with the original will, not disclosed during probate initiation, but validly signed and notarized. Lorraine inhaled sharply. Brandon turned toward her. "What codicil?" he whispered. Lorraine did not answer. The judge read silently. The room felt suspended. I watched her eyes move line by line, pause, then continue. This document appoints Miss Hayes as oversight trustee for major asset transactions, the judge said, finally, looking up at me. Is that correct? Rebecca nodded. It was Mr. Hayes's way of ensuring balance, she said, not disinheritance, oversight. Lorraine's attorney stood quickly. Your Honor, this document was never intended to be active, he said. It was a draft. Rebecca responded without raising her voice. It bears the decedent's signature and a notary stamp. It was active the moment it was signed. The decision not to file it was intentional. The judge's gaze shifted. Mrs. Hayes, she said to Lorraine, why was this document not submitted? Lorraine's lips trembled. I did not think it was necessary, she said. I was trying to keep things simple. My stepdaughter was very emotional. I felt no anger hearing that, just distance. Rebecca moved to the next exhibit. We would also like to address the durable power of attorney signed during hospitalization, she said. The judge nodded. Proceed. Rebecca outlined the timeline. Late-night signing, heavy medication, medical notes documenting confusion and impaired cognition, statements from Dr. Alan Pierce confirming diminished capacity during that period. The POA may appear valid on its face, but capacity and undue influence render it unreliable. Lorraine's attorney objected. The judge overruled. When the judge spoke again, her tone was firm. The court finds sufficient evidence to question the validity of the power of attorney, she said. It will not be relied upon for estate administration. Lorraine's shoulders sagged. Brandon stared at the table. Rebecca did not pause. Next, the unauthorized actions involving Hayes Residential Group, LLC, she said. Property listed for sale while probate was open. Loan applications initiated using LLC assets without court approval or operating authority. The judge turned to Brandon. Did you sign these documents? Brandon hesitated. I was helping my mother. Someone had to step up. Did you have legal authority to do so? The judge asked. Brandon said nothing. The judge looked at the filings, then back at him. The answer is no, she said. The listing agreement is void. The loan application will be flagged for review. Lorraine began to cry quietly, the controlled kind, careful not to smear her makeup. I only wanted to protect what he left us, she said. The judge looked at her steadily. Protection does not include exclusion, nor does it include concealment. When the ruling came, it was calm, deliberate, final. The codicil was accepted into probate. The POA was set aside. All pending transactions were halted. Oversight authority was restored to me, not as punishment, not as reward, but as instruction my father had clearly intended. There was no applause, no confrontation, just the sound of the clerk recording the order. Outside the courtroom, Lorraine tried to speak to me. I never meant to hurt you, she said. I looked at her, really looked. You never meant to see me, I said. There's a difference. Brandon scoffed. You think this makes you better? He said. It makes me finished, I replied. Rebecca touched my arm and guided me toward the exit. The air outside felt different, warmer, lighter, not because justice was dramatic, but because it was done. I did not get everything, I did not want everything. I got what mattered, the truth on record, the authority to protect what my father built, the quiet acknowledgement that I had not imagined any of it. In the weeks that followed, the consequences unfolded without my involvement. The bank froze Brandon's loan. The realtor withdrew the listing. Lorraine stopped calling. I went back to my life, not the old one, but a new version, shaped by clarity instead of endurance. I learned something important through all of this. Silence is not weakness. It is restraint. It is observation. It is the space where evidence gathers while other people underestimate you. If you have ever been pushed aside by people who relied on your patience, remember this: you do not need to raise your voice to be heard. Sometimes all you need is to stop holding it together for those who benefit from your silence. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts below. And if you want to hear more stories about quiet strength and earned justice, stay with me.